Thank you, Zoom. That was so nice of you. So I'm going to record this so that we can share it with other teachers because, as I mentioned, we're up against a lot of different events in the fall, but we really wanted to come together and celebrate History Day because all of us are big History Day buffs and supporters. And so joining us on the call, let's see, can I flip it? Here we go. So we have like a awesome team here today to talk with you. I know one of you mentioned first time doing this with your school and your students, first time being the one in charge. So we wanted to bring together a lot of great voices to kind of learn and talk through this process. So you heard a little bit from her, but we have Nicole from the World War I Museum. We have Hannah and Bill who are joining us from Shawnee Town, 1929. Myself and Matt are here from the Truman Library. And I hope we do have an interesting and helpful night planned for you guys. I promise we're going to be done by 6:15. I am saying that not only to myself, but I am saying that to all the educators from the museums on this call because museum educators can talk and fill the silence, and we can go on and on forever. So 6:15 is our stop time, and we do have a lot to cover. We wanted to start the first part of the evening just talking through what is this theme of rights and responsibilities and kind of how is the National History Day organization defining it. And then our three different institutions have actually put together slides full of content to show how our museum content themes storylines can all be connected into this year's theme. So just to kind of pop a little inspiration on what this theme can be, because History Day very purposefully goes as broad as possible so that people can really, the students can especially pick what connects to them. So this is just a little bit of a way to get some ideas going. And then towards the end, we're going to talk through all things NHD information for this year's contest, the timeline for it, with the different teachers that are here. We'll talk through what the different categories are and how to help students select them. But then also with all the judging experience and conference organization that we have on this panel, we're also going to talk through the evaluations as kind of that backward planning to help students understand what needs to be in their programs. So that's kind of our agenda. Those are our objectives to really break down that theme and provide the different insight into the thematic examples and what support museums can do. Because I'm going to pass it over in a few minutes, not just yet. I'm going to keep talking for a while, but I'm going to pass it over to Hannah to explain why are we even here? Why are museums even a part of this process if it's for K-12 students? But before we jump into that, I wanted to take just a couple minutes to really look at what this theme of rights and responsibilities is. And so I wanted to break it down. So first, in looking at the rights, how are they defined and how is the National History Day program defining it? So these rights are defined as freedoms or privileges that individuals possess as human beings or as citizens of a society. And so these freedoms and these different types of rights are limitless. But some of these ones that we have that can maybe help your students think about how they want to approach the theme is breaking down different categories that the rights can fill into. Because obviously when we try to do too much, we actually don't really end up presenting on anything. So kind of looking at what are these different segmented sections that rights can fall into. They can be civil rights. So those are the non-political rights of individuals that their governments are bound to protect, right? Those are our Bill of Rights, our freedom of speech, our freedom of worship, assembly, petition, right? Those are things that the government is bound to protect for us. There are political rights, the rights of citizens to participate in their government. So that's looking at the right to vote, the right to run for office, the right to participate in your governmental program. But in that same vein, as students are looking at it, who has that right and who doesn't? Who had that right before someone else? When was it, if was it taken away? So kind of looking through that lens. Social rights, as you can see, the rights to establish a basic standard of living. So your right to an education, who has the rights to safe housing, who's providing those rights, who's having better access than others. Social services like healthcare, access to food, caring for children outside of education. Those are all different ways that this idea of rights can be spread. Economic rights, the rights to allow people to participate in their government. So we're looking at themes of who has the right to own their own property, who has the right to earn fair wages, who has the right to choose the career path that they want to go, to participate in the economy, to build that income for themselves, who has the right to start a business, who has the right to work at a business under fair and safe conditions, so labor rights. So as you can see, kind of as we're looking at these, I know a lot of us think about rights as law, but I really like how with History Day, we're able to break down this idea into a lot of other different categories. Human rights, we of course have as an example from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Checking my notes here, make sure I get that date of December 1948. So you can look at why are they universal? Why are they inalienable? When are they allowed? When are they not? So these are the privileges or freedoms that individuals possess. That's kind of how the rights are defined. When we look at the responsibilities, we're looking more at the expectations of the individuals or members of society. And so different ways that this broad idea of what are responsibilities in the world can be divided in the legal responsibility, that duty to maintain order, and that is for the government, right? I work at the Truman Library. Truman, as president, has the responsibility to maintain order and justice and enforce laws within the country. But what are the citizens' responsibilities? Their responsibilities to obey the law? Are their responsibilities who's paying taxes? How are we as citizens, what are our legal responsibilities to respecting and accepting the rights of others? So kind of looking for both sides. Our civic responsibilities, as you can see, is the obligation to participate in the function of government. So again, we're voting. We are responsibilities of staying informed of what's happening in political issues. How do you keep up to date and involved and engaged within the civic system? The social responsibilities, the commitment to treating others. So looking at volunteering in the community, establishing organizations that support each other. So what responsibilities go for other citizens that you share the space with? And the reason we wanted to break it down separate, and you can see that I tried to pick, there are some overlaps, right, between the legal rights, the legal responsibilities, is because the biggest thing to point out as we dive into this topic is that the theme is rights and responsibilities. This isn't rights or responsibilities. What the History Day competition is really focusing on, what the organization is that these two have a relationship together. And so because they have that relationship between individuals and societies, projects need to include both. So both of both rights and responsibilities need to be highlighted and talked through. All of these projects within the students. They must be a focus. It does not have to be an equal 50-50 focus, but it does need to be a 75-25, right? It can't just be like responsibilities mentioned once. It needs to be a bit of a consideration because they really highlight the word choice of because they do have that relationship. They have that critical role with how individuals interact with the world around them. So it's important to consider what rights come with responsibilities. And so you can see here, a lot of the questions I asked when defining these are questions to bring up while students are doing the research. Who decides who has the rights? Who decides who has those responsibilities? What rights are giving the responsibilities? What are the responsibilities to live out those rights? You can see a lot of different questions here. And so these are really kind of those essential questions that students need to be considering as they're diving into those topics. And we're really going to talk a lot about these questions and probably hit on quite a few of them just by happenstance as we go through our content sessions. But I want to stop sharing and I want to toss it over to Hannah, who's going to share her screen, because as we're looking at these themes, why are we here? Why are the museum individuals on this panel concerned about History Day, in love with History Day? What is our role within this project that's focused around school classrooms, school clubs? So, Hannah, what do you have for us?
Okay, so hi everybody. For those that have joined since, I am Hannah Howard. I am the Curator of Education at Shawnee Town 1929 Museum here in Shawnee, Kansas, just across the border for all you Missouri folks. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen like a grown-up that knows technology. We're going to see if I can do this correctly. All right, can you guys see that?
We did. I'm going to throw up
Yay! Oh, I get a gold star. Okay. So we are looking at how our museum and museums like us can help you with History Day. So I've got my colleague Bill with me here as well. And our job is on not only figuring out the history for our museum, but how to tie it in when we have field trip programs, when we have outreach programs with kids. And we find that local history is really a fantastic avenue for people to take these bigger events, these national movements, these national themes, and really connect with it on a very personal level, because local history is relatable, right? It's in our community, it's in our town, it's using people and places that maybe we're familiar with or we're related to. So it really does set the stage a lot. You have a chance to kind of emotionally connect with people when you use local history, local stories. These are all photographs from Shawnee that we've collected at the museum, and how personable they are. It tells a different story than maybe just a broader textbook sometimes gets across. If you think on the national scale, the national stage, you think of statistics, you think of, really big overarching movements and shifts in history. That's not really how you're experiencing it at the local level, right? That's not how we experience our history as it's happening, at least not most of the time. We're experiencing it in the midst of our everyday lives, while we're thinking about other things, while we're playing with our dog or driving our cart down the street, or, talking with our girlfriends. There's a lot of life happening in the midst of history. And when you can dive into the local stories, I think that really sends home the bigger themes, the bigger decisions, especially when you're talking about, movements for equal rights and, other kind of really big macro events. So looking at rights and responsibilities and how this, kind of fits in with the broader theme. as we were saying, these local stories can really nail home that this stuff actually did happen. This is something you lived through, just like we're living through big national things today. But it's not what you think of every single, minute of your day. Asking questions about these events, how do they impact people in your community? How were they being involved or not with some of these big events, these big questions? Thinking about their emotions, thinking about what it was like to live through this. What was it like to face decisions like, should I be doing more to help with this right? Do I have a responsibility to serve, people that are different from me, or to help other people just besides me? Asking these questions is a great way, I think, for students to connect with the history that we're trying to talk about, because we can relate to feelings, we can relate to emotions when we put ourselves in their shoes. So the way in which museums answer these questions are the ways in which you and your students can also answer these questions. We always say historians are detectives. And so your kids get to play detective when they especially dive into these local stories, because sometimes this is all packaged up neatly in a nice little article or at a museum exhibit or, an online resource. But sometimes you're going to have to dig a little bit. There's a lot that's out there to help you. There's oral history interviews, either that you do yourself with people that maybe lived through it, or there's recordings of oral histories, available at local archives or places like Shawnee Town. We've got photographs, we've got census pages that you can look through to find details about a person or a family or a town. Newspapers are a really great resource. You find a lot of social stories in newspapers, as well as the kind of bigger ticket items. Talk to your museums. There's a reason why we're doing this workshop right now, because we think that we have a lot to offer you. We can talk to you about the stories we've collected. We can point you in the right direction toward resources that we've found to be really useful. Maybe we've compiled some newspaper clippings or some photos. Maybe we've done an exhibit on this topic in the past, and we have some things we can pass along. We also know a lot of experts in our field, right? So don't take for granted the fact that you can talk to a local professor, you can talk to a local historian, and if the kid is willing to do the interview and record it, that's a source. That's a great way to get lots of detail, and do it in a unique way that maybe you don't all the time. So we have a lot of things that you can take advantage of when you're kind of starting these projects. Okay, let's see if I can pass the baton back over to Sadie.
Awesome. And I'm actually going to pass it directly back to Nicole, because now that we've kind of done this little intro on the theme, what museums can do, now we're going to provide just a little bit of content inspiration for you, hopefully to kind of get those minds thinking about how different historical time periods can connect. Nicole, you're muted, but your screen is up, which is great.
All right, there we go. There's always something. Gotta miss something. I'm Nicole Dobronski with the National World War I Museum and Memorial. I am the K-12 education specialist here. As I said earlier, I am a former classroom teacher. I taught history for most of my 12 years in the classroom, with a small caveat to English language arts and the fun 1 year teaching computers, because you know how it is. You teach what they tell you to teach. So just some outline for folks. Wasn't sure if we had all locals or anyone coming from elsewhere, but just since we're online, but just a little bit about who we are. So back to Hannah's point of being very local, the National World War I Museum and Memorial, though it has a national name, has not always been a national space and was very much a local story, and has in and of itself, on the history itself of the space, there is a rights and responsibilities conversation. So the original building, the grounds, and everything that came along with it were all paid for by money that was fundraised in 1919 by Kansas Cityans. And then it was opened in 1926 with everything that you can see above ground on the image being there originally. And all of that was paid for by folks who just wanted to give to their community, and thought that they needed to provide a space for people to memorialize and commemorate those who had given their lives and sacrificed during World War One. And so there's a great part there of a local story for a global story. It all fits and ties back into each other. And then, of course, later on down the road, in 2004, we are designated as our nation's official World War One museum, and then the National World War One Museum and Memorial in 2014. And so, just wanted to give you kind of that background because, in and of itself, it is a local story of responsibility and action being taken. So. Some big questions here, kind of like Sadie had talked to you about earlier. What should different rights look like for different groups before, during, and after the Great War? And so I'm going to kind of break this down as far as all of the different aspects because rights are, you have to talk about both, right? So who contributed and took on responsibilities, but what did their rights look like within that? Did all people who acted upon the responsibilities asked of them have access to equal rights? And that's a really important story that I'm going to dig a little bit more into. And then how did responsibilities taken on by some groups affect their rights in the aftermath of World War One? And those are just some big picture questions that you could really push students to try and get an understanding of taking this route. There are a million other ways you could take a connection to World War One, and I'd be more than happy to work with you and any of your students to help find those instances, but this is just one way to look at it. So consider who took on responsibilities. We've got kids who are out there doing their due diligence. They're collecting money. They're going place to place to help out. They're joining the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts, and they are learning how to become future good contributors to the society. We have civilians at home and abroad committing their time, their efforts, and even their safety and well-being. And so we've got labor and manufacturing here at home. We've got people acting in medical roles. We've got people acting as support roles, and then soldiers who both are drafted and enlisted. And then that, of course, that role looks different in and of itself depending on who you are. People of color are included in all areas of this. Men and women are included in all areas of this, every single one. And so once again, who are these people taking on the responsibility? The responsibilities look different. There is the obvious one. You think war, you think of fighting. But that's not actually how wars are won. Wars are won with logistics. So who's in the background doing a lot of the logistic work? Healthcare and all of that, everything that comes with it. The working in industry back home, and in the home itself. And so everything that I've talked about. So fighting, we have African American soldiers, we have white men, we have people who are maybe too young that shouldn't have been there, but were. We have people who were maybe too old and maybe shouldn't have been there, but were. We have people both living up to a responsibility because they've been tasked with it by law, by being drafted, or because they're choosing to, because they're being asked to by their nation. And so it plays into a lot of different ideas. The support roles are also soldiers. A lot of the time, the majority of African Americans who enlisted or were drafted were put into things like stevedore positions where they are doing the movement of resources, which is not necessarily even a safe role, but it is a role that is vital. Without resources, a war doesn't get fought or won, for that matter. In healthcare, we have women playing a huge role here, as well as civilian men and men in the military. Oh, logistics, women as well. If you think about what we had enlisted women in the military as well as playing support roles outside of the military. Working in industry and in the home, we see women heading off to the workforce. We see children and families at home doing things like making wool socks and scarves and knitting things for soldiers. And then you've got other things like donating money. Donating, we've got thing after thing of donating money, fundraising in your community, sacrifice. There is both the sacrifice that a soldier does, but also that a family does, which is important to think about. You're giving up not just things necessarily, but also your family members. And then there's all of the preparation work that goes into it. And I'll show you some images to break some of that down. Look at rights at the time. We have white women who do not have the right to vote, who are kind of holding still that traditional space at home more often than not. There are some spaces where they can work and have a little bit more freedom, but it is really different in every single state, and even down to the towns across different states in their roles in society and what rights they have. We have white men, and of course, by this point, we're at the, you don't have to be a property owner anymore, but that doesn't mean that everyone has the same access to everything and same opportunities. Women of color, there's a variety of different experiences here. Be you Native American or Asian American, this looks very different, but knowing that there is a difference, and then men of color, the same thing. Jim Crow still very much exists. Citizenship rights are questionable. Access to voting rights for men of color is questionable at best in most places. Um, Lynchings are still going on, and so there's a lot of conversations to be had. What rights do they actually have access to? Immigrants, you know, citizenship, how easy is it to get here? What can you do once you're here? Young children, and that's just always that conversation, which is a really great catch for kids of what rights do children have and what rights have they always had? What rights have they gained over time, like the right to not work, for example, and to be protected, or in the case of World War One, we suddenly get the onset of the right to be taken care of decently, because our government decided it was a bad idea to let people grow up with really poor care as a child because they don't make very good soldiers as adults then. And then, of course, teenagers, and what do you do? You don't have many choices or options or individuality yet, but here we are calling on you to be a Boy Scout and step up once you turn of age. So we've just got a couple of different images here to kind of illustrate some of those things. We have women signal corps workers in the top left, also known as the Hello Girls. The center top is boys in Scouts, who are many of whom went on to go join the war as soon as they turned of age. One of the boys in this picture, the image on the back of it says that he came back home without one of his legs. And so during the war, he is a scout, and then he goes off to war and he comes back and his whole life has changed forever. The gentleman there on the motorcycle, one of these men is local Kansas Citian, and African American soldier who went to France. In the bottom corner there, this soldier is Native American man. Of course, Choctaw Natives were the first code talkers, but they were also Native Americans came out to fight in very large numbers. Some of whom, I should say, some of whom didn't even have citizenship and fought. Some of them by choice, technically without permission. Some of them got drafted and didn't say anything about it because they felt that it was their responsibility to go to war. And down in the center, we've got just men going over the top. And that just kind of covers that whole group. And then in the other corner there, we have two Native American women who volunteered as nurses. Their tribe had very recently, their nation had very recently, these women were old enough to remember their nation's land being taken by the federal government, and yet they came out for the US government and took on the responsibility to help soldiers. And you can see on here, stevedores, which were mostly African American, go out and do your duty. Every girl pulling for victory, Victory Girls, United War Work Campaign, get out there and do something, women. In the center there, you have, the child, we're going to make our garden at home, right, Dad? We're going to do the good thing. And then, the sacrifice bit of what, Dad has to leave. What can we do? You've got your recruitment photos and things like that, Liberty Bonds, where we're raising money so that folks can go off to war. The little boy in the corner there, what are you eating at home? What could you stop eating at home so that we can make sure soldiers have more to eat? Going overseas to volunteer as a driver, for example, in the American Field Service. So this is just a bunch of different ways and a bunch of different primary resources that we have in our collection to help. For some general context, in the post-war years in the United States, the 19th Amendment is passed. In 1919, it's passed by Congress, and then it's ratified in 1920. We have the Red Summer and the Great Migration, which take place starting in 1919, which is the Red Summer and the Great Migration out of the southern states for African Americans to the northern states, and then also some west that we see happening in the 1920s, which of course leads to a whole lot of change as well, especially in the Northeast with African American communities. Indian Citizenship Act is passed in 1924. Those top three have a lot of the reason that they happened is attributed to the responsibilities that these groups of people took on during World War I so that they could actively earn more rights. And they worked for those rights to get them. And so those are really great threads that you can weave with your students about that combination of right and responsibility. The Immigration Act of 1924 kind of goes the opposite way. We have immigration stepping up, and then we pass it and make it harder to for folks to come here. We pass quotas and make it harder for people to become citizens. And then there's international aid, where Americans are being asked to give or Americans actively give a whole lot of money and a whole lot of time to European countries while they are recovering, especially Belgium. Belgium is kind of the biggest. It was one of the countries that was hit really big that a lot of folks really stepped up to the plate for. So how can you find resources? We have lesson plans. So if you're doing this with a whole class for History Day that you could work with that fall into this under this arc. We have articles and online exhibitions. We have our whole area on World War I changed us. There are in-person visits if you're local, and then we have primary resources. So you can look on our website. We have both classroom materials section and our About World War I section. The About World War I is all articles, and the classroom materials are lessons. We have our online exhibitions. So even if you can't physically come here or you've got just a small group of kids that are working on it, we have online exhibitions. A big one here, so Make Way for Democracy, The Volunteers, and The Rise of Giving all very easily fall into this umbrella of rights and responsibilities. We have our collection. We're somewhere in the realm of 5,500 objects in our online collection, and raising that number, I think, is approaching 60,000 right now. So it's a pretty sizable amount, and so your students can look on there. I will caveat this: if you are working especially with middle schoolers or a child that is maybe more sensitive, that is an older age, there is no censoring that occurs on our online collection. So, if you're getting a kid who wants to talk about the rights and responsibilities of animals during World War I to act as helpers, because you never know where a kid's going to take something. If they type in horse here, there will be images of dead horses. So just that caveat of, and then, the same thing is happening if you type in trenches, you're going to see dead soldiers. So just that, if you're having kids work here directly, just be careful about that so that you're keeping that in mind. So I'm not positive. I was trying to make sure I didn't go over time on that. So I am going to stop sharing my screen there.
Timing was great. You did great. Look at us. We are still staying on track. We're doing good. So I think a lot of great connections of, right. I love that idea of like the responsibilities they felt in World War I, or because of the responsibilities they took on, what rights that came for them after the war. And looking at the rights pre and post war is really interesting. So thank you, Nicole. I'm going to stop talking and pass it over to Hannah and Bill, who are going to talk through more contents from their collections.
Okay, thanks so much. So we are, just to give you a little context in case there are people unfamiliar with our museum. So Shawnee Town 1929 Museum is what it describes. We are set in 1929, and we have what we call a living history program here, evidenced by the random hats and clothes you see behind us. That is not Bill's dress. And we have a lot of recreated and historical spaces here, a lot of original collections, a lot of reproduction objects, and we tell the story of life in the 1920s in this kind of suburban farm town just 10 miles outside of downtown Kansas City. So we talk about kind of the life of a farm community, but also living on the edge of a huge industrial city like Kansas City was. Just to give you that context, we are a much smaller local history museum. A ton of our content is not digitized in quite the same way as our partners here, but our brains are full of information in our data databases are full of digitized materials as well. So that's why we want you to kind of talk to us. But I'm going to turn it over to Bill here and share our screen because he's going to share you an example of the kind of story that you can find here. Okay. How do I do this? There we go. Anna has to relearn how to share a screen every single time. There we go. Current slide. Hooray! There we go.
All right, do you guys see it? Are we up?
Yes, you're good.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so what you have in this picture here, this is back in 1910, so a little bit before our magical year of 1929. What you see here is the McCallop family. And this is a family that is pretty much 3 generations we tell this story, and it honestly could be a Hollywood movie. It's that good. That's not just hyperbolic, it's true. And essentially, they talk about the rights of education and where the responsibility falls into the community. A lot of these this family goes above and beyond to ensure that the education of each generation gets better and better. So we're going to start with Harrison McCallop, and this is the farmhouse that he built. And his story alone is incredible. He was a formerly enslaved man in Tennessee. He fights with the colored troops during the Civil War. And afterwards, he moves to Shawnee, Kansas. And he actually had a pretty successful life as a farmer, growing everything from corn, wheat, and potatoes right here in Shawnee. Right here on the left is his son, Robert McCallop, who we're really going to highlight during this story. Now, this is a picture of the Dunbar School. We have it here at Shawnee, and it's a great environment for students to walk into. It's an actual old historic building. Some of the other buildings on our site are reconstructed. So you kind of get hit with that old smell of the wood and the desk, and it really kind of gives you an awesome educational environment to talk about segregation. The second from the left is Miss Lydia Ellis, and she was the teacher at the Dunbar, one of a few at the Dunbar. But his Harrison's son, Robert, who I showed in that picture, this is the school environment that he's kind of born into. It's segregated. There's a outhouse outside the building, and right in town is the school for the white children. It's pretty obvious that it's separate and most certainly not equal. Now, Robert only had a 6th grade education, but like I was saying, he wanted to ensure that his son, Billy, had a much better education than he. I'm going to talk about him now. So at the Dunbar School, after 8th grade, you're going to go to high school, but there was no high school that allowed Black students in the area. So Robert McCallop, depicted here on the far left, decided to take matters into his own hands. And he actually converts a delivery truck into a school bus in order to send these kids, drive them to Kansas City, Kansas, so that they have the right to continue their education as high schoolers. He ends up becoming extremely successful to the point that by the time the McCallop Bus Company is in the 70s, he has a fleet of 13 buses. So it was born out of a painful necessity and yet became a successful career for him and his family. Here we have a picture of the McCallop Bus Company in the 1950s, and it includes Robert McCallop, second from the left, and his son, Billy McCallop, third from the left. So it goes to show that there are 3 generations of McCallops, and through their pain and effort are able to ensure that the life of their children is improved. And talk about a poetic ending, Billy McCallop, shown here, I believe this is in 2008. He not only becomes a teacher himself, he fostered a love of learning at the Dunbar School and continuing throughout. He actually gets a national award for the Industrial Arts Teacher of the Year. So not only did he become a teacher, but he became an incredible teacher. And the story doesn't end there. Not only did he become a teacher, he actually had a hand in the foundation of our museum here. This is some of the people who created the museum, Shawnee Town, before it was called Shawnee Town 1929. And you'll see on the far left, the African-American man is Billy McCallop. So we have recordings of him talking, and he has been important part of the creation of this museum and the story of Shawnee, Kansas in general, as well as the desegregation of schools and how communities had to really go to leaps and bounds to make sure that their community was educated. And then if you have anything to add.
Yeah, so here, I'll see if I can exit our screen and return us. So, so we think that this is a great example of how a local history story can really help you illustrate the big ideas. You know, talking about segregation, talking about the experience. You know, even if you didn't live in the Jim Crow South, there was Jim Crow segregation. Especially when you talk about Kansas history, sometimes this can get overlooked because of the story of, you know, Kansas being free staters and their opinions leading up to the Civil War and during the Civil War. But there's a lot of issues still to work through, and education is a great example of a right that maybe you have the responsibility to fight for and establish equality for others with. So education was considered the silver bullet for African American rights for a long time, and this was one example of how in the 30s and the 40s they were fighting to overcome the circumstances where their rights were being trampled on, their right to an education, their right to equal resources, with a school that is not equally funded and no high school education is available to them. And so I love the story of Robert McCallop, you know, kind of forming this bus company in order to overcome the trampling of their rights and to fight for getting the education opportunities, not only for all of his kids attending the Dunbar School, but all of the kids throughout the Jackson County, Wyandotte County, Johnson County metro area. They were contracted by, you know, the 30s and the 40s. He was building his bus company, and he got contracts with all these companies to bus, you know, thousands of school children to the Sumner High School in KCK, which was the only high school available to them. So we think it's just a great example of how that story was playing out on a local level, and you can compare the two. Okay, let's see. I'm going to share the screen one more time and just show you guys kind of a few other ideas for how we can continue that. Okay, so kind of going off of the same theme, we've got a few others just thinking about our museum and the stories that we tell here and some of the research we've done, themes that would connect with your students and with National History Day that we encourage you guys to contact us or think of things like this that you can explore with your own local history museums. I'm going to point out the photo on the left is a teacher that actually got her start at the Dunbar School of Shawnee and then moved to another Shawnee school, which was the Madam C.J. Walker School in Miriam. Miriam, Kansas was not yet its own city. It was considered part of Shawnee. And she taught at the Walker School when a seminal court case was being decided with the Kansas State Supreme Court. It's Webb versus School District 90. The Walker School was the segregated school, and the South Park School of Miriam was definitely not equal. All of the parents of these students objected to the fact that they had to pay taxes in order to get this brand new white school constructed, and then their children did not have the advantage. And so they took it to the Kansas State Supreme Court in 1949. This was considered the precursor to Brown v. Board. That's huge. The fact that this case is pretty well unknown in our community and in our state, and it is what set the road for what Brown v. Board would be able to eventually do on the federal level. So we encourage you guys to look into that story. We also talk a lot about the other issues on this page. So women in the workforce. This is a story relating to a woman that we research here at Shawnee Town. I am a big fan of hers. I'm kind of a little obsessed with her story. Emma Huff Leastman, who is pictured here in the top right corner with her two children and about to have her third. And she, in this photo, is a married mother of about to be 5 children, and yet she is also an entrepreneur. She is running her own business, her own shop in town. Her husband was a streetcar conductor, and yet she owned her own business business. This photo in the center is of business owners and entrepreneurs in Shawnee in 1927, and she is pictured in the top left row. She is a woman that in the census of 1930 is not listed as having any career whatsoever. It is not always known or obvious when women have careers or businesses or participate in the economy. Their rights to economic freedom, independent support, and all of the freedoms that come with being able to be an economically independent person. All of those things were not available to women, and yet they were finding ways, sometimes on the local level, to subvert societal expectations. And we have more than one story of women like this in Shawnee. There's a lot of other topics our museum dives into. As you see, we talk about World War I veterans and what the experience was like 10 years later. We talk about a heavily immigrant and Catholic community and what the rise of the KKK in Kansas was like. We also talk about labor and working conditions. We talk about truck farming and agriculture, but also a lot of laborers that are starting to work in the factories in the city. So all that to say is we have a lot that you can address. Whatever your interest is, we can probably tackle it. So we definitely encourage you guys to check out our museum website. There's a QR code to our website, but we also have all of our contact info. Talk to us if you or your students are interested in exploring this more. We have resources. They're just not available online quite as much. We're working on that, but we're a small team. But we hope that you'll reach out to us or reach out to other museums in the area, because these kinds of stories are really common. We're not all going to have a digital exhibit of it, but we have the content. So, and with that, I'm going to pass it back to Sadie.
Awesome. Thank you, Hannah. And we are still staying good on time, guys. I promise we're still going to hit that 6:15. Thank you for those connect. And I love that you went personal, but then also gave us more broad ideas as well. And so I'm going to share my screen and talk through. I went for a topic with Truman. He gets talked a lot about, well, at least by our team, on different ways that he expanded rights for citizens all across the country. Truman is the one who signs an executive order. He desegregates the federal workforce. He desegregates the military. He fought for education reform. He fought for universal health care. Those didn't get passed. They come later with his good buddy LBJ. But these are big things that he's trying to champion. So I thought with this presentation, I would talk about a time when he actually tried to deny rights, and look at this theme with Truman from a different perspective. And where it's going to start is on June 25th, 1950, when the North Korean People's Army invades the Republic of Korea. They invade with the approval of the USSR and the People's Republic of China. And Truman, as the US president, as a founding member of the United Nations, has to decide what to do. Truman and his team, through the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan, have flipped U.S. foreign policy on its head. We're no longer isolated in our own hemisphere. We are now investing in other countries, and especially in post-World War II Europe, to rebuild it and push back the threat of communism. And Truman and his team have to decide if that also is going to be their policy on the Asian continent. Spoiler, he decided it was. And so on the 24th, after the invasion, Truman gets a call saying this happened. And the next day, he decides to support the United Nations and commit the U.S. military to supporting the South Koreans, their democratic government, and their fight to push the North Koreans out. This is a timeline. I'm not going to go through it, but you can see how quickly the decisions were made for Truman to agree to commit the troops. One word you're not going to see on this slide. If you search all things, one word you're not going to see. I'm literally just scrolling through. Actually, two words is Congress and declare. because a big piece of this story is that Truman does not ask the US Congress to declare war on North Korea. He actually purposefully does not request it from them because he doesn't want to slow down the process and create a longer timeline in getting supplies. He actually also thought that because of his role as commander-in-chief within the Constitution, it is within his authority. And if he asked Congress for permission, it would start to take away from the powers of the president that he thought was growing. So it is a very purposeful action that Truman does not ask Congress for a declaration of war. Keep this in mind because we're going to come back to it. Because we're going to jump forward 2 years. So we're now in 1952, and the war's not going great. The conflict is not going great. To help fund the war, the US government has raised taxes. They have put a price control on wartime industries, and they have limited wage increase for workers. This was a way to try and stop inflation, and this was a way to keep what the sanctions from World War II still in place to help support the war front. The problem is that as the longer this war continues, the higher the taxes are going. And because of their limited wage increase for workers, the wages are not increasing at the same interval that the taxes are. So the American people who are already done with war, who are over it, who have rationed, and who have fought through the Depression, World War II, and are coming out of this post-war are sick of it, right? Imagine how they're thinking. Imagine what rights they feel are being encroached on. Imagine how they think the government is irresponsible or is failing them. Truman's not the most popular guy in 1952. We're just going to throw that out there for you to think about. One organization that he is not very popular with is the Steel Industry Union. They are a very active, very powerful union, and they are wanting more of a wage increase than the 10% that is allowed within the federal sanctions. Truman knows how vital, obviously we all know how vital steel is to a war front. I'm sure Nicole can talk to us about war and steel, and he knows there's a problem. He knows that if this strike happens, the already dire situation from the Korean conflict could get worse, right? So as President of the United States, Truman, he knows he has the legal responsibility to maintain order within the United States and provide for his soldiers abroad in Korea, right? So he knows he has to not let this strike shut down more industry within the country, to not hurt the American citizens even more or create an uprising. But he also knows of his legal responsibility as commander-in-chief to provide for his soldiers fighting abroad. He also knows that his legal responsibilities and his rights in the Constitution allow him to sign executive orders are not in the Constitution, but legal responsibilities he has as president, he can sign executive orders. Both Wilson and FDR did executive orders to seize control of different industries during wartime to make sure continual efforts were going on to help the war front. The question for all of us to answer here is, does he have the political and constitutional right to do it? So he has the responsibility, but does Truman, the question he's faced with is, does he have the political and constitutional right to do so? So I love this political cartoon. This political cartoon was done in the 1950s in response to what Truman's decision is. He decides that he does have the power and writes Executive Order 10340 to seize control of the steel industries. I tried to think of a fun way to say that, like 10340, but nothing flows. So it's Executive Order 10340. He signs that executive order. to seize control. The precedent has already been done by Wilson and Roosevelt. And so he's trying to protect his soldiers abroad. He's trying to protect this industry and the whole nation during this time of war. The steel industry is like, I don't think so. We're going to sue for this. And this is where this political cartoon comes. This is the feeling of the nation. I love political cartoons. I hope some of you teachers teach them within your classrooms. We have a ton on our website, but this is the notion Truman's getting off, right? He's giving off that, he's taking that executive power. So our big question is, did Truman overstep his constitutional powers in seizing the steel industry, right? We mentioned the steel industry sues. He gets sued. This court case goes all the way to the Supreme Court, right? So Truman, he's taking away the rights of the labor union to strike, but he's doing it because he thinks that's his responsibility to the nation as president. So does anybody know, what does the Supreme Court say? Did Truman overstep his constitutional powers? Yes, he did. The Supreme Court ruled against President Truman and said that he overstepped the powers that were given to him. Now, why? What went wrong? I thought Wilson did it. I thought FDR did it during World War I and II. What's the only difference? Truman's personal decision to not ask Congress for a declaration of war comes back to hurt him. The Supreme Court ruled that Truman did not, in fact, have those constitutional rights to seize the authority of industries because the U.S. is not at war. Troops are abroad in conflict, but the U.S. is not at war. He did not officially ask Congress to declare war on North Korea, so he does not get those wartime rights as commander-in-chief that Wilson and FDR had. And so that is a fun way to look at how different presidents, while they are known for expanding democracy, or while they are trying to, we talk a lot about them increasing the rights, increasing the opportunities of civilians, and kind of taking that democracy on that upward trajectory. That doesn't happen all the time. So even Truman, who's known for providing those opportunities of African Americans in the federal workforce and the desegregation of the military, he's also at times trying to chipping away at those rights that other individuals have. And so this is a really great project, I think, for students to deep dive in, especially because I think it kind of leans into that responsibility a little more. As his role as commander-in-chief, as president, his responsibility is both to the nation and to the soldiers, but what constitutional rights is he playing within? So we have information, we have source sets on this, curated documents on this, political cartoons, photographs. It's a really great way to bring into the classroom. But in looking at the time, I want to highlight what this year is. So now that we've hopefully given a little inspiration about topics to bring in or how students can ask questions about the rights and responsibilities, here are important dates for you to know. The registration will open on January 1st. We will have links to this on our website. We will also be sending out emails. You are welcome to register until midnight on Monday, February 10th. A thing to note for those who are doing History Day for the very first time, I'm about to pass it over to my colleague Matt, who's going to talk about different categories that students can do within their projects. There are some projects that once you register them, no changes are able to be made. You can see that February 10th and March 1st, there are about 3 weeks in between there. Performances are allowed to be updated and worked on, and exhibits. But students are going to be submitting their websites, their documentaries, and their papers. And so those all need to be completely finished because they are sometimes judged early by February 10th. The exhibits and the performances are judged on site. Everyone is always going to be meeting with judges on site during the competition, but the performances and the exhibits are not submitted beforehand. So that is, I don't want to confuse anybody. Registration date is February 10th. And for your students who are working with the paper, documentary or website mediums, their submissions will be final on the 10th. Okay. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Matt.
All right, thanks, Sadie. So you're right. You mentioned that there are these different things that people can do, right? You want to help your students find the right NHD category. So for some folks, that's going to be documentaries, performances, papers, exhibits, websites. And my teaching assistant here says, Sadie, don't say bad things about Truman. Truman's great, but we believe everyone should construct their own arguments about the past and use evidence, hon. So you want to go on ahead, Sadie, to the next slide. Oh. All right, so documentaries for that film fanatic student, and you can see these are from a packet that you can get from National History Day. So they talk about some of the rules and guidelines. And in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and just talk a little bit. But this will be moving pictures that you can present, and this is another one that you're going to have to upload and send. If you could go to the next slide. Exhibits for the visual student, right? So think about the classic science fair trifold board that's like 36 inches tall or a little bit taller, covered with primary sources. There are going to be some rules about student sources, some rules about other things. These will be in rubrics. We're going to get to the rubrics here in the end. You can go to the next slide. All right, papers. This one's pretty standard. If you have a student that's really interested in papers, they can write about a topic and writes. The more specific they get and the more they reach out to our local partner institutions, the more impactful these papers are going to tend to be, right? There's always going to be a national connection to a local story and vice versa. And as you're telling that story, if you can tell that in a way that is really compelling and attracts interest, it's going to start off with something unfamiliar that brings you into a more familiar space. You can go to the next slide. All right, performances. This is for the outgoing student, but also theoretically for other students that you might not think are necessarily outgoing, but with a scripted performance, they might be totally into it. So in this case, you're going to have students do a monologue, like a one-person show where they're reenacting a historical figure, and they have a 10-minute time period to do that. So whatever your students' passions are, they're going to find a way to express them here for National History. Now, of course, you all are the educators in the space. You're going to set the standards for what folks have to do, but there will be a historical quality aspect to all of these. So if you go to the next slide, please, Sadie. Websites is the final one. This is for the tech savvy student. If you've been around for a while, there was a much maligned website development tool. So there's a sandbox that students play in to create their websites. That has gotten better, I understand. For people who are actively out building websites, I think it'll feel a little constraining. But this is a fun one for students to do. And it especially lends itself to certain kinds of topics. But we will talk about that next. So we can go to that next slide. So, how are you going to be evaluated and assessed, right? Well, first off, 80%, and you can see it here, that's in small font, is going to be on historical quality. So that's all the underlying historical research. That's not how it's going to manifest in any of those different presentations, but it's going to be the foundation of every project. It'll be evident everywhere, but especially in these things called process papers, which are 500-word papers that are helping explain what research you did. And then finally, this can kind of be a tiebreaker. So I have about 10 years of experience being a judge in National History Day, and I can hear Mark Adams, who's the organizer here for us in our region, saying, so if you have a tie, look at the historical quality. It's not a very good Mark Adams impression, but it is very true that that is what we're going to look at. So you have this rubric, right? And you can go to the next one, please, Sadie. All right, so each category in addition will have category specific rubrics, and these are going to be for your presentation or for a different piece of that. So if you have an exhibit, there's an exhibit specific one, and it gives you rules and guidelines at the bottom for what you can use, and then it also shows you the material up at the top. You can go to the next slide, please. Oh, all right. Oh, there's another example. So it's going to come from a different, this one's for a presentation, which is again limited to 10 minutes, right? So each of them are going to share that underlying 80% of historical quality, but then you're going to be able to have a specialized one there as well. All right, final slide. Oh, I guess that is that'll be it for me then. So
No, I
thank you.
think, hold on, I think
There should be one more slide, but oh yeah. So how are you going to use these rubrics and slides in the classroom? Um, First, I think that bringing them up with students is great because you're going to show them how they're going to be evaluated, right? And three different ways that I can think about to do that are analyzing the rubric. So you could hand out the rubric to students, just print a photocopy of it. We can send it to you, and then ask them a 3, 2, 1, right? Three things they know from looking at it, two things they're thinking about, and one thing they still wonder. Some of it will be like word choices and verbiage, right? Then another way you can use the rubric in a classroom is to become the judges. So you can have students when they're in the later parts of their presentations kind of role play. One group will be the judge and the other be somebody who's presenting, and they can score and give each other's feedback. And then finally, you can use it as a self-assessment tool for your own growth. So you can have students at a very early stage judge themselves, and then at a later stage, add some more comments and feedback. And then you can follow that along and say, I agree with you here. Maybe you're being a little too difficult on yourself here. But these are different ways that you can use the rubric as a teaching tool that also, while it increases the quality of the projects, help them focus and helps them start thinking about what judges will be asking about. All right. And I think that is it. And apologies for, frustrated time. So we were fine for an hour. And then, of course, it gets to be my part. And then we're very upset. But if you're interested in any of these activities, you can reach out to us at the Truman. We can talk through what that looks like. We also can help echo back things for your students. So we know that you can tell them pretty much everything we can tell them, but they see you every day. You're a normal standard person for them. If Sadie shows up, they're going to be paying attention. And when Sadie says something that you've also said, they'll be like, wow, you say that too. And you're like, of course I do. So we are happy to be not only resources, but also reinforcers for the work that you do. All right. And that's what I've got.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Matt. And as you look at those rubrics, and we will be sending out our PowerPoints to everyone that's here and anyone that's interested, and they will be hyperlinked to different pieces. So those rubrics are definitely hyperlinked. They're on the, we'll put them on our website on Truman, but then also on the NHD Missouri State Contest website. So you can actually print them off. And you can get those great images that break down the 5 different categories that Matt highlighted. Only thing I'm going to add to the categories, because he did a great job explaining all of them, is papers are the only projects that you can do, that you cannot do as a group. All other categories, students can work by themselves or in a group of up to 4 or 5 students. Papers have to be done on your own. So I'm just throwing that out there. But now I wanted to share, Nicole did a great job of sharing some of the links in her in her presentation about the digital offerings. Where can you find this information on websites for documents, for exhibits, for objects, lesson plans, and visuals? Shawnee Town has a great website to go as well. As Hannah mentioned, while theirs may not be digital, their team is so thoroughly supportive of this contest and will absolutely be there to help for when you reach out. The Truman also has online curated source sets. We have photographs. We are the hosts for the regional contest. So you'll register by coming to our website. We'll be sending emails out about that. But we also have great resources to support the learning and topics as well. And then we would be remiss if we sat here and told you that the three of us are the only museums in the Kansas City area that value National History Day or student learning. Kansas City has an amazing, amazing community of museums and archives. And again, when students look at those big, big national projects, steering them a little local for those kind of local pieces. Students who want to look at Stonewall, maybe have them talk with the UMKC Gay and Lesbian Archives of Mid-America and see what kind of local movements transpire to get a different take. So we wanted to leave you with some of these great resources. Thank you so much for joining us on a Tuesday night in a season that's full of after-school activities and parent-teacher conferences. We are here to support. I will go back to the slide. Sorry, I'm just going to go leave the timeline up here for those. We're going to stop this recording, but we will stick around and answer any questions that you all have for sitting through here, whether it's content or about the program. We're happy to stay on and answer any questions, but thank you guys for joining us, and thank our presenters as well. Did that? Oh, I think I hit stop sharing and I meant to hit stop recording.